In the case of shutting off access to Visa and MasterCard for large
Right.
swaths of Russian citizens, what is that going to do? Like those
Yeah.
citizens of that country had nothing to do with this
Yeah.
conflict, and yet we're
Yeah.
punishing them. And how is that going to affect the perception of the rest of the world for those people? Are 6, 5, 4, 3? We're just two hippies with beads. Hey,
¿Cómo
buddy.
estás? How you doing?
Bien, bien. ¿Y tú?
Super, super. Exciting to talk with you again. We've got a really cool concept that we want to dive into for this one,
Mhm.
and that is mass adoption
Yeah.
and what it's going to take for us to get there, ideas on how we can get there, if we can at all, in terms of moving the needle. Can we move the needle? Is it just something that's going to happen as a byproduct of more time passing? And yeah, I thought we had some pretty interesting things we were floating around. So I guess to start it, what do you think is required for us to get to mass adoption? Is there anything that can be done from the side of building the ecosystem and the people that are already involved with it, what they can do to participate to increase mass adoption?
Mm, so my perspective on what's going to create mass adoption, I've sort of had the same idea since 2017. I've called it the Visa point, and I always use like coffee shops as like my thinking tool for this. And I basically think that the smell trail of the payment system just has to exist in real places, and everyone has to see them for quite some time for it to pick up steam. So I think one of the most active things that someone could do might be to literally get like QR codes into more retail locations that are like, this is a payment method that this place accepts. And we're just on the cusp of scaling technologies being to the point where that would be an efficient payment method. Like if I'm a coffee shop and I have a ZK Sync wallet address, I could put that QR code out there. The uselessness of that would be right now that there just aren't that many people to use that payment method. But the ability to accept payments in a way that has lower fees than a credit card right now already exists.
Right.
So I think that's how it generally happens, is just subconscious nudges where people see that this is a payment method, they get curious about what it is and kind of do the education without knowing that they're doing it, and that's how the ball gets rolling. That's how it becomes unstoppable in my mind. It's sort of one of the only ways I see it going.
So you think in the part of the like private sector, individuals can choose to you just increase the awareness of something like a you know payment by Ethereum with a QR code. So that could be one way to facilitate that, but it's just it sounds like it's just more almost like brand awareness campaigns. Is that
Mhm.
how you see it?
Yeah, something like that. Like sort of how Apple is everywhere, that you just have
Right. You just see like
billboards of someone
right.
with AirPods.
I
Yeah.
I was wondering if you thought that would be like because this is something that I had been thinking about with like some sort of a DAO that just raised money for kind of like guerrilla warfare tactic marketing campaigns, like billboards about crypto everywhere. And you already see that in New York and like Times Square, and uh, more of that brand awareness. If that would have like, if that would be like an efficient use of resources to promote the space.
It would do something. I mean,
Mm.
so when Apple does that stuff, they clearly know that the more everywhere they can be. So at some level, marketing is just about touch points, like how many times
Mm-hmm.
people interact with the idea of your brand and what that idea is. So there's clearly a role for that. When you think about my proposal there, it's kind of the same thing. It's
Coffee shop.
this QR code that you see in this everyday part of your life. It's in your circuit, in your set of things you do. So getting getting billboards, park benches, those kinds of things, creating an awareness. I think that's kind of like the crypto.com approach. That's sort of,
Right.
like
Some of the
they're
bigger players, they're blasting everyone with ads, and Coinbase with the QR code with Super Bowl, and then it sounds like there's another component there as well, which is just the scaling and the layer two adoption, right? So this seems like a pretty big hurdle that the community's been dealing with for a while. What do you feel like you know the prognosis is on how far we're out from something being really implemented at a large scale?
I think Coinbase is really they're the people that are going to know first. My I sort of think that Coinbase needs to support certain L2s, need to make it so that
Mm-hmm.
instead of having to first buy Ethereum or buy USDC or any of these Ethereum based coins, that if I can just directly buy USDC on the Polygon network or on ZK Sync or on any of these roll ups where the fees are almost non existent, if I could do that, then I would almost never use my layer one wallet. I would take my bank account money, I would transmute it into a crypto stable coin. Preferably, I would use it in that form in retail locations and for trading purposes. And I would self custody it most of the time. I would perform most of my activity that way. And then every now and then, if I had to do something to interface with the traditional banking world, I would
Mm-hmm.
offboard it that way. But I think the goal should be to stop going back,
Right.
stop going to the post office, stop having to send regular letters,
Right.
Um,
And
so how do we get retail on board? How do we get more retail locations on board? I think is the straightest path to people realizing what this is. Like it's not something that you buy, trade for a while, and then turn back into dollars. It's you get it and you use it. End of story. Like Amazon accepts it. Like that would be a
right.
huge.
Oh
If I could
yeah,
just
that'd be insane. That'd be insanity if that
people would
when I
make the
should say when
connection.
that comes. Yeah.
They would make the connection immediately, wouldn't they? They would. It's like, oh,
Right.
I get this stuff, and then now I just use this. Sometimes it goes up in value, and I can buy more stuff. And that would make the connection, and then just
Yeah, and
like no one
it's
goes
like
to
a
the mall anymore.
mindset. It's a mindset shift that I wonder if that's like a later stage because it there's going to be so much. I mean, people still go to the post office. We're in 2022, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people go to the post office. So I don't know how like how quickly we're going to get to that point where we move completely into the new economy. There will be people that do it sooner than others,
Hmm.
but I wonder what else is what else inhibits kind of adoption of things like L2s, because even when we're working with clients and they have an idea where they want to change a whole lot of metadata of NFTs, and it's like, well, you'd have to use Polygon to do that, be like the obvious choice to do that. There's still barriers even within that ecosystem to want people to really move to that area, because of from a marketing perspective you have to then there's one more step to make people change their change over to Matic, right? So
Hmm.
like even within the ecosystem of people who are pretty well adept, there's barriers to switching over to L2. So like why do you think that is?
I'd say for the deep insiders, there's a couple of reasons, and then for the more casual users, there's another set of reasons. For the deep users, it's sort of this vague idea that, or no, maybe not vague, rather concrete, that the Polygon team still holds the admin keys. That
Mm.
it's not a truly permissionless, censorship resistant part of the ecosystem yet. That it still has the potential for state rollbacks or whatever.
Why do they have that? Why haven't they given that back to
Well,
the community?
because it's a new technology, it hasn't been
Right.
battle tested through all of its possible edge cases, and so there is kind of a need to keep the safety rails on that. Same story with Arbitrum and Optimism and these other roll up technologies. They all sort of have that same thing where they need to check on it. They still need to kind of check on it a little bit to make sure things are going according to plan, get it up to scale, and they need room to make updates to how the system works still.
Mhm.
So
And
that
then for
makes
the
it not,
less,
yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, and for the less astute individual who's not thinking about it at that level, what do you think is going on?
There, I do think it's just the bridging. It's understanding the bridging from one chain to another and what that means and what that represents and the fear that you're going to lose your money on the transition somehow. I think that, yeah, that's an obvious, that's a reasonable concern to have because, you know, which cross-chain protocols do you trust, especially if you've never interacted with one before? How do you tell the difference between hop.exchange, which is a pretty cool one, and
Right.
whatever else out there that might just be, hey, send your money here. Everything will be fine, we promise.
So, and that's the other thing that I feel like there's this lack of guardrails in the ecosystem, which is kind of inherent.
Right.
But
Hmm.
for true mass adoption, you do kind of need that for the for the average user to be like fully bought into it. I think so. It's almost like there's this technological advancement side, building developing that piece of the ecosystem to make it more user friendly, more safe for the average individual, and then just brand awareness in general. And those are the kind of the two components that you see towards that'll lead us towards mass adoption. Is there another one?
Yeah, yeah. There's like a that is the value of centralization, right? Is just like
Right.
a body that says, "Hey, this is legit." You know,
Mm,
I have a track record of giving you trustworthy advice. This next thing I'm saying is also trustworthy advice. But you don't want that group to be the network. You want it to be a voice on the network, not the network itself. I think that's sort of and I think that's kind of a role maybe exchanges can play.
mm,
Maybe Coinbase can function as a guide to the DeFi ecosystem more so than they're doing now. Right now, they're largely in competition with some of the tools in the DeFi ecosystem. Dexes do their job better than they do in many cases. And so, but they could serve as a thing that validates large marketplaces. You can see sort of the effects of centralization acting as a source of like a back of the envelope seal of approval from like OpenSea. OpenSea is riding
right.
on top of public data on public contracts, and they're putting blue checks on NFT collections and stuff, and they're saying this is a legit collection. We've talked to these people, but the contract behind that collection is not under the control of OpenSea.
Right.
It's under the control of the people who launched that collection.
Yeah. It's these authority figures that can send out trust signals, and
Hmm.
you need those. You do need
Hmm.
those. So you see that being a piece of it. The the development aspect as well. You know, brand awareness. What other influencing factors do you think there are? And then maybe we can jump into like what happens when we get to that visa point. What happens once we get to that mass adoption?
The other thing that I think are important, and we saw recently the executive order thing.
Right.
So this is a form of large scale validation, that acknowledgement from the old world, I guess you would say, from existing authority figures and systems. Where if you have an executive order from, you know, the president of the United States saying that we need to look into this crypto stuff, it's in a big way sort of a validation of the
This is
system.
not nothing. Yeah.
It's not nothing. It's at least that, and it's recognition from high places where in 2017 you had to wonder every day if you were just crazy. Like, does anyone know we're here? Does anyone know what we're doing over here.
Right.
And that's not the case at all this time. If anything, it
Right.
feels like it is getting big. It is getting important. It is something that people are talking about in mainstream places, and it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it's going away anytime soon.
And you have to, as well, like it just kind of occurred to me, like one of the biggest things that's led a lot of eyeballs to crypto is this whole Ukraine Russia thing, right? Because now there's all the information about how Russia is going to avoid sanctions using a lot of crypto, and then that's probably bringing a lot of awareness to this space, but maybe not even in a positive light as well. So you're also battling this perception of this space, which has been the story since it came out. Is like, is this a tool for uh, you know criminals to use like with their networks, and that's kind of like what happens with almost every like mass adoption of technology, right? Like when you had the internet that first came out, who were the first people that were using it? It was like a bunch of hackers and people doing, PGP encryption for all communication. And I mean, so that's probably a big percentage of what's happening as well. It's just the perception of the space and how world events lead to that global
Yeah,
perception of it.
I think crypto, Bitcoin, and these large networks are in a position to provide virtue in the world where it's very hard for people to do it. I think in a lot of ways, the rise and fall of empires comes from what people in large groups, even very smart people, can't help but do. And if we look at what's happening with the Federal Reserve, where there's a bunch of inflation, and it's very clear to basically everyone involved and to the chairman that probably the right thing to do is jack up interest rates real high
Yeah.
to kill inflation. That's probably the right thing to do. But that has knock on effects that are politically unpopular, that are going to be economically bad for us in the short and medium term. And if you're Jerome Powell, it's just very hard to do that. It's hard to get people in your cabinet to agree to let you do that. It's hard for you, being the person that knows the right thing to do. Um, and so you could say that it's a virtue to have a neutral monetary network that cannot be gamed or that cannot be used to sanction or censor for whatever purpose.
Right.
And when people get mad, or not even when they get mad, when nation states need to make selfish decisions that are in their interests, they can't help but use these financial warfare tools. And even if it's short sighted, in the case of shutting off access to Visa and MasterCard for large
Right.
swaths of Russian citizens, what is that going to do? Like those
Yeah.
citizens of that country had nothing to do with this
Yeah.
conflict, and yet we're
Yeah.
punishing them. And how is that going to affect the perception of the rest of the world for those people? Are we creating societal unrest that's
Yeah.
going to bite us? Like it's not going to get the result that we intend. It's not just going to get a bunch of people angry and get them to attack Putin. It might just give them a mindset that makes them
Kind
feel
of like
isolated.
what happened in after the First World War, where like all of the sanctions came down on Germany that created this, this crushing,
That
um, yeah, and that basically led them to say like, well, fuck this, let's
yeah,
let's elect this crazy guy. So
and so maybe
yeah, you wonder.
we need these systems that can do the unpopular but right thing, like maintain this virtue of a neutral payment rail, even if it feeds the bad guys or who we think is the bad guys. Maybe we don't know everything.
Yeah,
Maybe we just need these systems that the drama of humanity can't override. And maybe we just need that as a deep assumption. And crypto provides that. It's the money that you can't print and that you can't stop.
yeah.
And maybe you shouldn't be able to stop it. Maybe you should have to resolve your human drama in other ways. And maybe that's the lesson.
Hmm. Yeah, that is an interesting. way to look at it. And it's also the first time we've ever had the option to
Hmm.
even play around with that idea. So it's probably pretty scary for a lot of people. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of like adults in the room, sort of. Adults in the room, something even more untamperable than the US government or something like that, or the Chinese government, whoever you think has the most
sure.
military might in the world at the moment.
Ukraine. So, so what do you predict? I guess what do you predict happening when we do hit this visa point? What do you think is going to change at a macro level?
So I think we saw a very interesting year with the 2020 2021 bull run, and we saw this stuff take like a main stage. Now we're 3 or 4 cycles deep, depending on how you count it, and we saw the world take the market more seriously, but we also saw again the realization that it's all not quite ready for prime time. It's not quite practical as a retail payment tool yet. And then
Mm,
you even see people try to shift the narrative to take away from that realization and say, well, it's not even meant for that. It's meant for this store of value thing. It was never even meant to be a payment. It was totally meant to be a payment network. I don't know. That's sort of my opinion. And I think the next time, like, I don't know what will happen in the rest of 2022 or 3 or whatever, but certainly we have another major bull run in 2025. And when the 2025 bull run comes around, this whole thing is going to have teeth. The scale will be there. It will be cheaper and faster to pay for things on crypto networks than with traditional banks or with credit cards. It will be more international. Everything will be 10x better than any other option. And at that point, you'll have more coffee shops, restaurants, retail stores, e-commerce websites that will it'll be exciting. And when those numbers are flying up and people make all that they make that connection that they can just turn their money into this and then keep it in this and they can buy everything they need in this currency and they can buy from more places because now they don't have as many international barriers and everything is a little more secure and a little faster and a little better. It's going to win just because it's better. And it's sort of like how does anyone seriously debate the idea that a Tesla car is better than most other cars anymore? Not really. I haven't heard that argument in a while, and I think if you get in the car and drive it, it's pretty clear. And there's still a handful of objections, fees, ESG concerns. There's still a handful of these little things that they're all right on the edge of evaporating. And when they evaporate, and when there's Starknet zk Sync with 20,000 transactions a second in perfect privacy, what's going to stand in the way of that?
yeah. So how do you think that integrates to a potential, government-backed coin?
Hmm. I don't know. That's a big um, X factor out there.
Right.
Um,
Because they're going to want that, of course, because it's control, it's centralization, it's you can see everything, right? Not
mhm.
that you can't already with like blockchain analytic companies. You can pretty much see everything already. So I don't know, but that is an X factor, and I wonder about that because
I don't know what it means. Like
yeah,
so for all of our history, banks have had, but we rely on banks. They're not governmental institutions, and that's where you hold your money, and it's
mm,
a custodial process, but it's not the government. If a central
right.
bank has a
So
CBDC and
the
is
banks would
there
be
going to
against it. It's like the banks wouldn't want that, right? Because then it would just go straight from the government to the people, and they would just cut out the banks.
hmm
And
and
the
who's the
banks are Yeah.
Do we have a self-custodial system? It doesn't sound like something they would want to do. It doesn't sound like I would have a self-custodied wallet. I should, but it doesn't seem like something they want to offer me. That doesn't
Yeah.
sound right.
I feel like that's why the education is such an important role, because when people learn about that, like taking control of their own keys, owning their own money, you can contrast that with anything that like a centralized government entity is going to come up with, and you're like, well, unless you're forced to use it, why would you? Why would you? Because so
Mhm.
that beckons the question: well, will you be forced to use it? Right. So I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a big concern. I think it'll be very um, politically unpopular for that to be an idea. I think you can see some politicians are picking up on the idea that there is a new political class. We can talk about
Mm,
that time, but
yeah,
this
that'd be another
polit-
one.
yeah, and I think we might already be far enough along that there will be active voices against that to where, I'm sure there's a fighting chance that those ground rules get written well still.
Well, and
So there's optimism there.
that seems to be that seems to be the tonality of that executive order that was just put out a couple of days ago, where it was like, we will, foster, or something like, we'll foster a healthy environment towards the development of the space. Something. So I don't know. You could take that any way, but it seemed like it wasn't as damning as people thought it was gonna be. So that was interesting to see. So hopefully
And I
you would
think,
think you'd think like political incentives would favor innovation. You would think that would, in a perfect world.
if you look at it from engineering perspective, the private industry and these lone groups of open source developers have to build the system before they can use it.
Right.
So it has to get built, battle tested, proven elsewhere before they're even going to get to use it or try it or think about it. And they aren't going to do anything super risky. They're going to rely on a well-built system because the last thing that a reserve bank needs is to try and run a CBDC and have the software fail.
Yeah, that's it's kind of an idea of like, that's why they're going to keep these other things around in case that happens, right? So
Yeah,
it,
if they have a centralized system,
oh man,
then they've just
right,
created a wartime target. They've created a
right,
just one
yeah,
more centralized system that
whew,
an enemy country can attack.
yeah. Interesting stuff, my man. I
Hmm.
think that's our time. But I really liked that one, and I think next one we should crack into that political emerging class, because that's a pretty cool idea that I think
Yeah, there's a
we could
new
chop
political
up.
class. Yeah, that's a good one to talk about.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, I think this has been a good one. It's been a productive
Right
one,
on.
buddy.
All right, bud. See you on the next one. Cheers.
Cheers.